I would like to share with you one aspect of my research, something which was quite surprising for me. It's quite a long time that I've worked on it, and gradually developed more and more aspects. So I want to briefly share with you these findings.
Okay.
Well, okay. So the title of the lecture contains some kind of a contradiction, because sanctity usually is connected to authority which you cannot argue with, and you have to accept it. Whereas satire means that you criticize, usually with ridicule. So how can you find both of them in the Zohar, especially taking into consideration that the Zohar is considered, or the image of the Zohar is a book that is sanctified and deals with holy and sanctified divinity and human beings. No, it doesn't move. Page down. No, it doesn't move. Maybe this way. Oh, okay. So the outline of my lecture, this is the outline of my lecture. There are 3 parts. I'll start with a brief introduction to make sure that everybody knows what we are talking about, and I will introduce some major aspects of the Zohar. The major part of the lecture would be part 2, when we read 2 texts and deal with sanctity and satire in the Zohar in light of 3 points of, on one hand, ideals, aspirations, and another, the question of the authorship of the Zohar, and the third one would be the literary question or aspects of the text, and each of them will divide into several other points. Well, I'll end with conclusions. So I have a new computer. This is why I'm not used to using. This is why it doesn't work. Okay. So here is the introduction, and to keep it short, I'll bring up only 5 very brief notes about the Zohar, so all of you know whatever you have to know for the sake of this lecture. First of all, we are talking about a very big, voluminous book. In the edition of the Margulis edition, here you have a photo of its cover of the first page. It comprises about 2,500 pages in 5 volumes, and it's very densely printed. That is, you have about 40 to 50 lines printed on each page, and without any division into paragraphs, without any consistent punctuation. So it's very hard to read, and it's a very lengthy book. This is point number 1, which you have to know about the Zohar. We don't talk about 1 page, a book of 1 page or 2 pages or even 50, but it's something very big. The second one is that it is organized according to the portions of the Torah. It starts with Genesis, Noah, and so forth. It goes on through all the portions of the book of Genesis. It moves on to Exodus, and so forth and so forth. This is the major structure. There are some deviations, but this is the most important one. This means that the major genre is the biblical exegesis. It goes by the verses of the Bible. For example, here it starts with the first verse in Genesis, and it gives the verse and it gives its interpretation. And the interpretations are very unique. Here you have the first verse of Genesis, and it doesn't go to speak about the firmaments and the earth and so forth as it appears in Genesis 1, but about engraving of unknown engravings in the luster. The light exists already, and all you do is add some engravings. So it's a very unique description. Although I'll tell you that one of the articles I'm preparing is trying to show that it is very much embedded in the contemporary Christian understanding of the creation of the world. So just leave it at that. But you see here the genre and the sources of this exegesis are usually rabbinical, but sometimes also medieval Jewish thought, including the Muslim and Christian neighborhood, of course. But we don't only have this exegesis, we have also about 350 narratives. And these narratives resemble very much non-Jewish contemporary narratives. I'll give you then an example in a minute, but the most important issue concerning my lecture is that this is the source for infiltration of feelings. Narratives involve the description in that time, involve lots of presentation of feelings of human beings. I don't speak here of feelings towards God. This one you have in all over. But feelings and relationship between people, this is very much very often described in the narratives of that time. I'm talking here about satire, and satire is connected to feelings, and this is why this is very much important that the Zohar includes not only exegesis, but also narratives, which resemble their contemporary narratives. So here is an example. This drawing appears on the invitation to this lecture. It is taken from the Venice. I'm not sure you can see the whole, can you see the whole?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
It is printed in Mashal Kadmoni, which was written in 1281, just at the same time the Zohar was written. About this, the resemblance between this book and the Zohar, I lectured on your first invitation to Alcala in October 19, long before we thought of a pandemic. So this was the core issue of that lecture when I gave it in Alcala. And indeed, in that story, Mashal Kadmoni, we have satirical elements. So this might be the source of the ability to bring in satire into the Zohar as well. The fourth element is, we could talk about it for 3 years, but I'll mention only two or three sentences. The major theology was expressed in the Zohar is that one which is called theosophy, and doesn't resemble the modern theosophy of 19th and 20th century. It's something altogether different. The major idea of theosophy is that God has two aspects. One is infinite and is not, you don't draw it in such a chart as you see it here. And the other, which this chart describes, is the 10 Sefirot. The 10 Sefirot are 10 finite aspects, unlike the infinity. And they describe the attributes of God. It's powers, its abilities to function in this world. They are the communication between infinity and this world. I'm mentioning here only each sephira has a name or many names. I want to mention here only two names because they will be important in the narrative we're going to read. So the upper sephira is crowning all the others, and this is why it's called crown. And the lowest sephira is kingdom, and this is the one which actually rules the world. It's the representation of God in this world, and this is why it's called kingdom. It's also called Shekhinah, which is hard to translate, but it basically says that God resides through that sephira in this world. God communicates with this world through the Shekhinah. So for the sake of the rest of the lecture, I'm mentioning only those two sephirot. The fifth point, which is very important, and first of all, to know the Zohar, secondly, to in context of the issue of satire and sanctity in the Zohar, is that there is an ongoing debate about the question of the authorship of the Zohar. Who wrote that voluminous book? Tradition has it that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a Tana, a Mishnah scholar who lived in the land of Israel in the 2nd century, wrote it all by himself, or dictated it to his secretary, whose name was Rabbi Abba. But most of the scholars say that this is just a pseudo-epigraphical text, and it was in fact written mostly at the turn of the 13th and 14th centuries. The founder of Kabbalah, of the field of the research of Kabbalah, was Gershom Shalom, and he wrote in 1941, during World War II, that the sole author of that book was Rabbi Moshe Idel. He had good reasons to say that, and he wasn't the first one to say, but he is most important in our field of research. That's why I'm mentioning him. So Moshe Idel lived in the 13th century. He must have died either, that we have two dates, either in 1295 or in 1305, either or. But ever since the 80s of the 20th century, and ever since the work of Yehuda Liebes, most of the scholars today think that, in fact, Moshe Idel wasn't the only or the sole writer of that book, or maybe we don't know what, in fact, he contributed to that book. But the book was written by many people. They were might have been socially organized in fraternities, groups with some very strong social connections. Be it fraternities or single authors, they must have written most of the Zohar between 1280 and for quite a long time and again, re-editing the text until the 30s of the next century. It is my thesis, which I brought in my first book, that in fact the beginning of the writing of the Zohar this started in the Middle East in the 11th century. So this is a date which is different than what others say. And the book or the text, whatever was written then, moved gradually, was carried by people who might have run away from either from the Crusaders or from any other wars, and moved gradually, slowly to the Iberian Peninsula and settled down there. And in any case, they wrote most of it again as of the 9th decade. So these are the 5 most important notes concerning the Zohar, and I will return to most of them later on. So now we have to move, it appears again, to the second part of my lecture, which is reading 2 texts, but I'll start with the first one, which is the Initiation of Robichia. It's a very famous narrative in the Zohar. And I'm using here the Tishbi's translation. I have prepared a scientific edition based on, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 manuscripts. It appears both in my book and in a separate article, which you can find in academia. And in any case, it will be an example of one trend of ideals and aspirations of that group of writers of the Zohar. They were interested in sanctity, in mysticism, I would say even extreme mysticism, and they had mild criticism, at least from the point of view of genre, against outsiders. So they must have been must have been active as a group, whether it's a fraternity or not, we don't know. But they had very strong affiliations with each other, but they criticized others and they presented it in a very mild way. In general, we find lots of genres of criticism in the Zohar. The mildest one would be, oh, we have said this and this, but now we say a new thing. So we renew the knowledge. Once you renew and refresh the knowledge, you in fact criticize the earlier phase of knowledge. But here you see it's a bit harsher. It's not as mild as the one example which I've just mentioned. The heroes of this narratives are basically 2. One is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, or I would call him Rashbi, and the other is Rabbi Chia. Now you have to remember, it's a pseudo-epigraphical text. They talk about people who lived in the 2nd century, and they even take some information which we learn from the Talmud and other Midrashim, but they probably speak about themselves. So every narrative and every part of the Zohar is in relates to 2 strata at least. The outer garb, which speaks about past history, 1,000 years old at that time at least, and the inner one, which in fact speaks about themselves. Now, another introduction I'd like to add is that Rabbi Chia is indeed an historical figure who was very famous. He was called Rabbi Chia Hagadol, the great Rabbi Chia. The president of Sanhedrin, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda the president, called him the great, called him the holy, relied on him in matters of study. He sent him, historically, it's a fact, he sent him all over different places to collect the knowledge of law, halakha, as was orally known, because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the president, was initiating a project of writing down the oral tradition. And Rabbi Chia was authorized by him to do it. And Rabbi Yehuda had great respect for his knowledge, for his moral behavior, which was outstanding, for any different aspects of his behavior. And so the story starts with a description which sounds as if it is really historical. I cannot read it here because it is hiding. I'll read it from my page. I cannot see it on the screen. Rabbi Chia the Great traveled to visit the masters of the Mishnah to learn from them. So he was moving from one place to another to collect the different parts of the oral Torah, which is law. He went to, he came to the house of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he was a Tana too. And unexpectedly, he saw a curtain of fire that divided the house. And he was baffled. This is not what you find when you go to another teacher of halakha. The house of such a teacher is not surrounded by fire. And Rabbi Chia understands that this unnatural fire signifies the fact that these people are not really in this world. Their bodies might be in this world, but their souls are up there in heaven. So they have transcended this reality and are in a different world. They don't study halakha. They do something else. And so Rabbi Chia doesn't dare cross that curtain, and he stays outside. And I didn't bring the text because I don't have enough place and enough time, and you can read it in the text you can get from Irene. He was listening to what Rashbi was talking inside that room. He was talking about Song of Songs, which means he was talking about love. And he was using a verse which was already in the rabbinic time hinting at the messianic action and figure in this world. So Rabbi Chia understands that he isn't listening to something concerning halakha, but to conversation about love and messianic age, and he induces that by this means that God loves his people and will redeem them eventually, and maybe a messianic figure is all around here on earth already. So Rabbi Chia heard this and said, alas, the celestial beings are here studying Torah, and I am outside. He means to say that those people which are inside are representing the 10 or the divine world, the Sefirot. They are celestials, they are not human. And I, Rabbi Chia, the Great, I'm outside. And indeed, Rabbi Shimon hears him from inside and says, it must be the Shekhinah out there who speaks, who weeps. Just, if you know something about the Shekhinah is very often described as somebody, as some being or some woman who weeps over her children. And here Rabbi Chia is weeping just like the Shekhinah. And he wants Rabbi Chia to come and cross the fire and enter the house, that is, elevate himself to heaven just as they are, and make the fire whole. So once the Shekhinah goes inside, the fire of the Sefirot will be whole. That is, inside there are 9, and they're waiting for the 10th person for a full minyan, so that they can really have a spiritual power to do their prayers and rituals. So this is a beautiful description. They, in fact, give compliments to each other. The Robichia understands that they don't deal with halacha, but with love, redemption, and some kind of spiritual activity. And he tells them that he understands that they are celestial, and they give a compliment to him. You're celestial too, yeah, just like the Shekhinah. You remember that chart, you know, but this chart also tells us this is a compliment, but also criticism. We are celestial beings, and you're only the Shekhinah. You are the lowest. Rabbi Yehuda, the president, might call you great, might call you a holy person, but in comparison to us, to our spirituality, to our knowledge, you're the lowest one. You're the Shekhinah, and not more than that. Rabbi Chia wants to enter and join the group. At first, the divinity doesn't let him do it, but in the end, the gate of fire opens up and he joins, and he bursts into a prophecy. He suddenly, the gates of heaven open up, and he sees the celestial being, and he says, what I see is beyond my imagining. It is, I'm ready to die because it's so beautiful, because it's so lofty. I'm ready to die in this flaming fire of pure gold, in a place where the sparks fly on every direction, each spark ascending to 370 chariots. Each chariot divides into thousands of myriads upon myriad until they come to the Ancient of Days, that's God, who sits upon the throne, and the throne shudders before him, before Rashbi. 260 words. This is Shimon Bar Yochai, whose voice is heeded by all the thrones, by all the firmaments, by all the chariots. And this, in the next sentence, sounds like a text taken from the revelation of Mount Sinai. When Rabbi Simon completes his study of the Torah, who has seen the songs? Who has seen the joy of those who praise their masters? These are the angels. Who has seen the voices I cannot see again, that travel through all the firmaments? They all come on account of Rabbi Shimon, and they all bow down and prostrate themselves before the Lord. And the Lord is it's not clear who is the Lord. Is it the Lord or their master, that is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? So the description of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is as somebody, it goes on and on. I've sent the text. You see other wonderful compliments to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Of course, Rabbi Chia decides to join the group, and this is why it is called the initiation of Rabbi Chia. He is initiated into the group. This is why we think that maybe there was indeed a fraternity and not just single people who are working there. And in any case, Rashbi is described as an all-knowing being, personality. He knows everything about the world. He is going to redeem the world. In a paragraph I didn't bring, God listens to him and obeys to him. There is a huge glorification of Rashbi. It's a mystical experience of rising to heaven, entering paradise. Mysticism is much more esteemed than law. So it's a sort of a mild criticism of law, of the halakha, and what you have here is support of a ritual life, very unique one, where 10 people, which reflect the Sefirot, it's a ritual they perform. It's of course not something everybody can take part in it. It's not for everybody. Not everybody is ready to rise to heaven and be in ecstasy, enveloped by fire. So this is something for the elite, which doesn't include the rest of the people. So now let's move to the next text. The next text was published by me. It's only some parts of it are published in the extant common editions of the Zohar. It must have been censored. Only the homilies are printed in those editions, but in the manuscript I found, which is kept in Moscow, the homilies are part of a narrative, and the narrative is includes a very harsh criticism of their peers, of the other friends, the other scholars of that group. This text promotes ethical and conservative behavior instead of extreme mysticism, unheard of rituals which most people cannot perform. Just few words about satire. This text has satirical aspects in it. In any satire is meant to be a constructive tool for social, political, and ethical criticism. People should hear the criticism and act or by it and change their perceptions. It does so in a variety of artistic devices which ridicule people or values for the flawless shortcomings or anything else. One of the artistic aspects is the move, oscillation, when describing personalities between differences and identities, and identity. Some aspects of the personalities which are described in satire are just exactly the same as the people, as is typical for the people criticized, and some are very different. To make it very, very quick, you all know it. Here is an example of a satire there is lots of resemblance, but there is also, of course, differences. The very fact that you have puppets instead of real human beings, instead of bringing Netanyahu or Trump, you have a puppet. So it's very clear that you have differences, and you make the people receive the criticism by making them laugh and enjoy the evening. This is an example, I don't know if you heard about it, of another example where you have identity. Sacha Baron Cohen went to a rally of supporters of Trump, and until the end of the evening, where he sang racial songs and made the audience sing with him, nobody knew that he wasn't a supporter of Trump, but somebody who tries to mock him and ridicule him. So he dressed up as a supporter, he sang songs, and they didn't notice that he wasn't them, he wasn't one of them. You can buy this text, you can find about it in the internet, you have more information. To all of you, you know very well about who it speaks, and the writer and the artist. And here you have an example of showing the resemblance through adversing the characteristics. The windmills are very small, and the fight sounds ridiculous, and the knight isn't strong or mighty as it should have been, but very skinny and frail and awkward. So these are means, this reversal of characteristics. These are part of the devices that Zohar uses as well. So here, let us read a story. The story is told by Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, well, once upon a time, you know, I know that Rabbi Shimon and Elazar, his son, and Rabbi Pinchas, so they were, you know, staying somewhere in the area of Tiberias. That's typical for the Zohar. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was wondering, I don't understand. I don't understand why it so happens. I've seen the feet of men. They're immoral. They're pursuers of adultery. And these people go on with their adultery, although their legs or their feet are seized by cruel stingers in the world, that is, by evil angels. Why do these people go on with their adultery? I don't understand. So here is point number one in the satirical aspects. Rabbi Shimon doesn't decree, but he wonders, he doesn't understand. And Rabbi Pinchas is willing to explain something and is explaining to him that those mighty people are in fact the descendants of the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis chapter 6. The chapter speaks about the fallen ones, and these verses are a bit unclear. Some of the explanations or the interpretations say that these people copulated with women on this earth, and they had progeny which were bastards, and they were very mighty. And again, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I'm astounded. I don't understand by this whole generation. Why do they not consider and contemplate the wisdom? Don't they know that this is happening? Why do they go? Do they go on with the bad deeds? And Rabbi Pinchas tells him, answers him by bringing a very famous proverb. When an old man is in the house, an old man in a house is a good omen for the house. So you always have to keep the old man in your house. Don't kick them out. A righteous person in a generation is a good omen for the world. Now, the ironic aspect of it is that in some of the midrashim, this is said about Rashbi. Rashbi is the good omen for the world. By his very existence, he brings good omen. He brings all goodness to this world. He brings redemption. And now Rabbi Pinchas tells him, dear Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you know why these people are sinners? Because we don't have an old man. We don't have a righteous person. Maybe you should have been, but you are not. Please remember this sentence, this old proverb, about whom is it said? He says in sarcasm. And he goes on to say that the Blessed One casts fear or awe of the judge and the ruler upon the generation. As long as the awe of the judge is upon the generation, it is apparent that he is righteous and they are righteous. What he says, Rabbi Pinchas, is it all depends on the leader. And you are not functioning as a real leader. You forgot your duties. You are not anymore, or you weren't yet, a good omen for your generation. When awe is withdrawn from the generation, he is wicked. Look what terrible words. And the generation is even more so than him. Don't be astounded. Don't wonder why everybody is a sinner. You are not fulfilling your role as a leader, Rashbi. You, Rashbi, Why don't you do it? If we read the whole text, is because you're busy with your weird rituals, with your extreme mysticism. You go up to heaven and you forget the rest of the world. You think that when you go up to heaven and when you enable to take the rest of your disciples with you, you help the world. No, you just forget the rest of the world and you don't take care of their moral and spiritual aspects of your community. This is why they are sinners, because they are left to themselves and they have no leader to follow. Again, I can't see. I can see. Yeah, I can't see it on my screen, so I remember it says, how come he didn't know that? Where was I? And wasn't I there? How come I didn't know that this teaching was said by others? And he says, Rabbi Pinchas replies, no, you didn't know. For the master, who wasn't you? No, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. For the master, that is you, was seated beneath the palm in the desert, amidst his company, when the decree was ordained from the house of the king. Somebody else was trying to lead the world, and you were far away in a cave, in a desert, just like it is told about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Talmud. And therefore, those sons of God had bastards in the next paragraph, and they abound in the world, and they're mighty and roughshod, and they're ruthless, and they're causing us lots of troubles. But don't worry anymore, dear Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because Rabbi Yitzchak says, now I am destined to usher you into heaven, into the world to come. It's not who will take us while we are alive, but in the end, just like any person who is alive when it is dying, I will make sure that you enter paradise. Don't worry, you're really helpless. You don't know too many things. People talk about things and you don't know, and you don't help our nation to be moral. But I see that the solution of Mishnah difficulties, plaque on your mouth like the other saints of the Mishnah. You're okay. You're okay enough to enter paradise. Okay, I'll take care of it. So in the first story, he's all-knowing. Just like a mirror, this is a device which is often used in the Zohar. A mirror story, which turns upside down the characteristics and makes a reversal of the characteristics. Rashbi doesn't know too much. He's okay. He means well, but he's not a leader. He doesn't know anything. He is lost, and he's for sure not. He won't bring redemption to the world. Yeah. So the conclusions. We have two different stories. In the first one, the first one, Rashbi is all-knowing, is redeeming the world for the sake of the group and for the sake of the rest of the world. And this fits the image which has been created to the Zohar. So everybody says that this is what you have in the Zohar. The image of the Zohar is that it presents an extreme kind of mysticism, where Rashbi is the greatest saint, which is divine just as he is mundane, and he can redeem the world. But the fact is that in the Zohar, there are lots of other stories as well. This I showed you one story, but there are other stories, one narrative, but there are others which preach ethical behavior, the regular prayer the conservative prayer, the behavior, just as any Jewish community would perform in any age throughout the ages. The difference between those texts and the regular ethical writings is that they are aware of the Sefirot, and they do use the idea of the Sefirot to enhance their promotion of ethical behavior. But in general, we have two groups, big groups of texts within the Zohar. One speaks of extreme mysticism, and the other opposes the first, ridicules the first, and advances the ethical conservative behavior. The most important conclusion is, for the sake of the debate about the authorship of the Zohar, they cannot be the same authors who declare this or support that. There must be different people who wrote the Zohar and fought each other for their values, because they had different ideals and visions of what is the right way to live. Thank you very much. Here is, again, a part from the same Mashal Kadmoni. So I'll stop sharing and